Teodora Groza is a fourth-year PhD student in competition law at Sciences Po and a research fellow for the Track AI project, an initiative dedicated to investigating the governance of AI companies co-hosted by Sciences Po and Codex at the Stanford Center for Legal Informatics. She's also the editor-in-chief of the Stanford Computational Antitrust Journal. Teodora, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lazar, for the introduction. Thanks to the organizers for giving a platform to young female scholars to showcase their work. It's much appreciated. So you have my title slide. What I try to do here is to put an image which looks as if it's taken from the background, from this beautiful mural. I think I got the color code very wrong, but I think the aesthetic is slightly there. So, does GenAI generate antitrust issues? If we read the mainstream media, it definitely does, plenty of them. So Microsoft invests in OpenAI, bad. Microsoft invests in Mistral, even worse. Big tech firms outspend venture capital in AI investments, even worse. And I could go on for about 37 slides and talk about how many reasons we have to be worried. But it's not what I want to do today. Instead, I want to take a step back and see where we are. So I'm going to kick off this presentation by talking about how AI technologies will evolve in the future and where we are in the road from GenAI to AGI. And after I set the scene, I want to put in the spotlight the issue of how AI companies are governed, both internally and externally in terms of the market dynamics that they give rise to. So let's get started. The road from GenAI to AGI is long. There was this recent article in the Washington Post, I think, where Yann LeCun said that AI is dumber than a cat. Well, the title is a bit misleading in the sense that AI is not one thing. There are several AI technologies and each have their own capacities. What we are talking about today is GenAI. And what did I do? Well, I asked a GenAI instrument, ChatGPT, to define itself. I thought I would get a funny answer saying, I am this or that. But instead, it's a very factual description of what GenAI does. And in very simple words, it generates content, texts, images, videos, and so on. But this is only one stage of AI technologies. What we are all hoping for, or perhaps not all of us, because some of us fear a lot, is the emergence of AGI, artificial general intelligence, which refers to systems that are able to perform any tasks that human can, with flexibility and with the capacity to learn on their own. We are not there. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that we are just at the beginning of our conversation about AI, and we have a long way to go. I'm happy to see that competition authorities from the CMA to the Autorité are doing a lot of efforts trying to understand how the market is working and to get information from market players. But I think that any enforcement at this stage would be premature and would potentially have the undesired effect of trying to freeze the market where it stands. And what I'm trying to say here is that as new technologies emerge, there will be also new governance models and new issues that these governance models generate. With GenAI, we may be most worried about competition. But once we have AGI, I think that the primary concern will be existential threats to humanity. So there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to see, and I think it was Eric Brynjolfsson who said that technologies evolve very fast, but our understanding of those technologies is not as quick. So I think it's time to take a step back and try to reflect on what's happening before we move on to any action. And that's what I'm trying to do today. I think that a very important aspect for competition authorities is to understand how AI players are organized internally. And this is something that we don't really do a lot as competition scholars, except for people like Anna, who works a lot on the issue of how companies are organized internally. But with AI companies, this is particularly important because their governance structures are special, or as some would call them, even weird. So let's look at OpenAI. This is their structure taken straight from their website. It's big, it's messy, it barely fits the screen, but the most important part is that you can see that it has this weird division between a capped profit arm, which you see down there, and then a non-profit, which runs everything. And I think the Microsoft OpenAI deal has been discussed times and times again, but not really understood. Because people say very often that Microsoft has a 49% stake in OpenAI, but OpenAI is not one thing. You can see there that Microsoft only owns economic rights in the OpenAI LLC, so not in the OpenAI nonprofit, which means that those economic rights are divorced from any formal governance rights. Now, why does it matter? It's weird, fine, but why should we as competition lawyers care about this? So there has been a lot of discussion, and not just discussion, but also action, and I'm talking about investigations, of these AI cooperation agreements under the merger control framework. This was the first article I saw on the topic. It came out in September 2023, I think. In the meantime, there were many others. And why we need to look at the internal organization of these companies is because when antitrust engages in merger control, it falls back on corporate governance aspects. So if we look a bit at the assessment under EU competition law and under US antitrust, what we need to establish is control/decisive influence. But the issue is that these AI companies come with their weird structures, and these weird structures don't necessarily fit into the molds of how antitrust understands corporate governance. So when we talk about Microsoft OpenAI, they have an economic interest, but they have no formal governance right. So can we talk about control? I'm not sure. But at the same time, if you were following the media debate, there was a lot of discussion about how Microsoft might have played a decisive role in reinstating Sam Altman as the CEO. So control rights on paper might not be control rights in reality, and so on. In the US, because we don't need control but only decisive influence, we might be a bit more flexible to apply the merger control framework, which is also a bit counterintuitive because usually we think that in the US companies can do whatever, and in the EU we regulate and we are very strict. Well, for once, it's the other way around. Now, why do these partnerships matter so much? They matter because they're not an insular development, but they are, in a sense, a defining feature of the landscape. There's this beautiful graph done by the Autorité de la Concurrence, where they try to visually show all the partnerships in which big tech players are involved and how they have sort of permeated the entire AI ecosystem. Now, sure, we have this entire mess, but what makes it so special? What's the deal with this so-called investments, partnerships, arrangements, collaborations, de facto mergers, and so on? So there was this interview with Margaret Vestager from, I think, October this year, no, a bit earlier, September, where she said that these partnerships are different ways of organizing, and she was very right. But the fact that they are different doesn't mean that they are new. And luckily, we don't come here with empty hands as competition lawyers. We have a lot of economic theory, which has been there for decades, that we can use to make sense of these partnerships. In the Williamson piece, which I assigned for this panel, and I'm sure you have all read several times and taken notes of, I might cold call as well. I learned from the best. He explained that there are actually various ways of organizing economic activity. So we don't talk only about the Coasian firm or market binary, but in between firms which are defined by authority relations and markets where we have contractual interactions, there's an entire space where we see hybrid forms which are special in many ways and have advantages as compared both to firms and markets. I put those question marks there because as competition lawyers, we don't talk about hybrids. This is not something we are trained to think of, and I think it's the fault of how the law is structured because collaboration is always seen with suspicion I mean, after all, the law is called in most jurisdictions competition law. Hence, what we want is competition, not collaboration. And whenever we see companies collaborating, there's a suspicion that this might be a cartel and it might be anti-competitive. Now, of course, we have the entire architecture of block exemptions, but these are exemptions from the application of the prohibition of cartels. They don't really mean that we want to carve out a space for companies to collaborate. And that's a pity because these hybrids come with a lot of benefits. So as compared to vertical integration in the form of a firm, they maintain the high-powered incentives to innovate. When you don't merge into one party, you are still encouraged to innovate as much as you can. They are more adaptable than market contracts because they are more flexible. When we have a contract, we rely much more on black letter law than when we have a long-term agreement. We know each other, we have this sense of trust, and so on. And something that we also see happening now, when you bring people together for a longer time, they share know-how. And these parties, by collaborating long-term, have a lot of know-how spillovers. They learn from one another. So we have the economics that has been there for decades, and that we can fall back on to make sense of disagreements. But also we have to keep in mind that disagreements are not that new. So we have seen collaborations between tech companies since a long time ago. There's this article from the 6th of August, 1997. I wasn't even born at the time. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I hope you still take me seriously. Which says that Microsoft and Apple were collaborating to build together an office pack for Apple computers. So we have the economics. We also know that they are not that new, these partnerships, but somehow we still don't really understand them. And what I'm talking about here is that I see a lot of discussions where people say the Microsoft OpenAI deal is exclusive and it's bad because it's exclusive. But actually, if we read the OpenAI website, it says that Azure is the primary cloud platform. Primary doesn't mean exclusive. And on top of that, we see that OpenAI is actually actively trying to get cloud from elsewhere, as Sam Altman is trying to convince the UAE, as well as Asian chip makers and US officials to help his company get access to more computing power. At the same time, I did a bit of digging and I read the public cloud agreement that Microsoft put on their website, where they specifically say that when they provide cloud or computing power to third parties, these agreements are not exclusive, which means that customers are free to enter into agreements with anyone they want. All that to say that we shouldn't rush into recycling conclusions we see published by some without doing our own research, which is not even that hard to do because all this information is out there. And something which I wish we would discuss more in any context whatsoever in competition law enforcement is the issue of counterfactuals. So we often want to enforce and regulate and so on, but we don't really think about how the market would look like in the absence of these practices that we are suspicious of. So would we have ChatGPT today if OpenAI couldn't have partnered with Microsoft? Because these AI technologies, they need tremendous computing power, they need a lot of financial capital to hire top talent, and usually they also need something which people at this conference love, ecosystems, in which they could embed their AI technologies. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Teodora.